Albert Sammons, not much talked about these days, and there was me thinking that this video would be a short one, but it turns out there's quite a bit of information available about this fine violinist. So who was Albert Sammons? Well, he was an English violinist, a composer, and later on a violin teacher. What is amazing though, and stands out about him, is that he was almost entirely self-taught on the violin. Yet that wouldn't stop him from being able to play the Beethoven and Mendelssohn violin concertos. He had a wide repertoire as both chamber musician and soloist, although his reputation rests mainly on his association with British composers, notably Elgar. Sammons went on to impress audiences, including royalty, with his solo appearances and later became leader of the Ballet Russe and the Philharmonic Society Orchestra. Over a period of some 40 years he made a number of recordings, many of which were later reissued on CD. Like Elgar, Sammons disliked travel and was uninterested in promoting his reputation abroad. He thus remains relatively unknown and undervalued in the world at large, although he did enjoy private chamber music sessions with the likes of Ysaÿe, Thibaut and Rubinstein on their visits to England. Despite not caring much for travel, he did however play some engagements in both France and Germany as well as the Netherlands. The importance of Albert Sammons in the history of British music making should not be underestimated. For around 2 centuries, Britain had suffered a dearth of eminent or notable musicians and had habitually imported foreign celebrities whilst underinvesting in its own arts practitioners. Sammons' arrival marked something of a renaissance in this respect, one that was recognised quickly by a native audience coincidentally starved of the usual exotic talent by the events of World War I. Quoting from an article here which I will leave below in the description box. And it complemented the new canon of British composition launched by Parry, Stanford, Elgar and others towards the end of the 19th century. Upon hearing him play, Ysaÿe proclaimed, "At last, England has found herself a great violinist." A bold yet sensuous tone, phrasing that was both virile and freely rhapsodic, and keen musicality all met in a man whose intensity set ablaze many a solo score. Let's go back to the beginning then and go over his bio. So Albert Sammons was born on the 23rd of February 1886 in Fulham, London, the second eldest of 4 children. His father was a shoemaker and a good amateur violinist, but as it turns out, overall not such a nice man, as we shall find out. Albert was the second of 4 children. Sammons' father did however recognise this son's exceptional talent, and so Albert Sammons started to receive some lessons from his father around the age of 7. Apart from those lessons, he was virtually self-taught. As a side note, he engaged in various sporting activities as a teenager, such as boxing. His first professional engagement was in the band at the Earl's Court exhibition in 1898. The conductor was so impressed by the young boy, 12 or 13 years old at the time, that he made him leader. And so it was that with 3 performances a day, he received his first taste of professional life. Around this time, he left school and became a professional musician, partly to bring extra income to the household, as his father was a compulsive gambler. Sammons' father took both Albert and his eldest brother Tom to symphony concerts at St James's Hall and Queen's Hall. The boy began to gain a reputation for his reliability and was engaged by many London musical establishments, as well as in the Hungarian and white Viennese bands popular at the time. Sammons also received a few free lessons from the Eugène Ysaÿe trained Spanish violinist Alfredo Fernandez and from another of Ysaÿe's students, Frederick Weist Hill. At 16, Relations with his father reached a point where Albert and his brother left home to stay with friends, only returning when his father walked out, basically deserting the family, to join the band of an ocean liner. And the two brothers were therefore obliged to provide for the rest of the family. During the brief time when he had fled away from home, he found lodgings with a musical Jewish family in Bayswater, which led to a meeting with violinist-conductor Jack Jacobs. Through Jacobs, Sammons was launched into the upper strata of the light music profession. During his early years in the music halls, this was when Sammons had some lessons from Ferdinand Weist-Hill and also from another violinist, John Saunders. As these sporadic lessons marked the extent of his formal tuition, Sammons does not really belong to any school of violin playing per se. However, it is true to say that he did receive some excellent guidance. Both Weist-Hill and Saunders were professors at the Guildhall School of Music, and as already mentioned, Weist-Hill had been a pupil of Issai at the Belgian Conservatory, where he had carried off the Grand Prix. As for Saunders, his musical ancestry went back to Spohr by way of Wilhelm Bernhard Molich. Albert Sammons' first concerto performance was the Mendelssohn E minor concerto at the Kursaal Concert Hall in Harrogate in 1906. Among the concertos in his repertoire were those by Beethoven, Brahms, Bruch and the Mozart G major. He married Laura Tompkins in Middlesbrough on the 31st of October 1907. Later on, in 1920, they divorced. But around this time in 1907, Sammons was recruited to play at musical parties for the upper classes at their country houses. He became the leader of the British Symphony Orchestra in a series of Amalgamated Musicians Union Sunday concerts at the London Coliseum in 1908 to 1909. Conductors of the concerts included Jimmy Glover and Alec McLean. He was also engaged by Ernesto Buccellossi at the Waldorf Hotel and Wyndham's Theatre. It was at the Waldorf that Thomas Beecham first heard him, and in August 1909 offered him the position of sub-leader, soon to be leader, of his orchestra, which later included opera seasons at Covent Garden. Thus began Sammons' rise to prominence. After hearing Sammons play the last movement of the Mendelssohn Concerto, Thomas Beecham sent a note to Sammons saying, "Splendid, but tempo too fast." Sammons replied back with another note saying, "Thanks, I will play it again a little later on." Their meeting on that occasion was an important turning point for Sammons, and the appointment Beecham gave him in his symphony orchestra was a job he would remain in for the next 5 years. In 1910, with Thomas Petrie on second violin, Warwick Evans on cello and Harry Waldo Warner on viola, he formed the London String Quartet, with whom he remained until 1917. The quartet gave concerts mainly in the UK but travelled to Amsterdam and Paris, with a repertoire extending from the classical period to contemporary works, including Verklärte Nacht in the presence of its composer Arnold Schoenberg. In 1912, he performed Saint-Saëns Concerto in B minor before an audience that included King George V and the composer himself. And 1914 was the year that Sammons finally met violinist legend Issai. Albert Sammons mainly appeared in the UK, although he did lead the Beecham Orchestra for a 6-week season with the Diaghilev Company at the Kroll Opera House, Berlin in 1913, and having played under Pierre Morter for the Diaghilev seasons, was invited to lead the orchestra at the Casino de Dieppe, giving 2 concerts a day and extending both his orchestral and chamber music repertoire. Sammons also had the opportunity to serve as solo violin in addition to leader under Pierre Morter. This experience gave Sammons the opportunity to play most of the standard concerto repertoire. Often in those days, the leader would step out of the orchestra to play a concerto as part of the concert. After the end of the First World War, Sammons all but gave up string quartet and orchestral playing to concentrate on a large regular programme of solo work and chamber music recitals throughout Britain and Ireland, and later broadcasts. Sammons, William Murdoch on piano, Lionel Curtis on viola and Laurie Kennedy on cello founded the Chamber Music Players in 1921, giving their first private performance on the 6th of January of that year, and their first public concert at Haverstock Hill, London on the 13th of January, going on to give many concerts at the Wigmore Hall and around the UK. The Australian-born pianist William Murdoch held a close association with Sammons for many years. Gerald Moore and Geoffrey Tankard were two other pianists with whom Sammons had long-standing partnerships. Moore performed many works with Sammons on the BBC and recalled that he started with Sammons as an accompanist and ended as a partner. Other pianists Sammons performed with included Frederick Lamond, Benno Moisevich and Mark Hamburg. Now let's talk about his relationship with the great composers Elgar, Delius and Debussy. Sammons was particularly associated with Edward Elgar's Violin Concerto in B minor, which he first played on the 23rd of November 1914. He made the first complete recording of the concerto on the 18th of March, and on the 10th of April 1929 with the New Queen's Hall Orchestra conducted by Sir Henry Wood. He estimated that he played the Elgar Concerto over 100 times, including at the proms, and gave his very last performance of the Elgar on his 60th birthday in 1946, with George Weldon conducting the BBC Symphony Orchestra. In addition, he also made the first recording of Elgar's Violin Sonata in E minor in 1935. The Renaissance of English music commenced with Edward Elgar and was well underway by the time Albert Sammons appeared and became one of the great musicians of the 20th century. Working with all the eminent composers and conductors brought Sammons into the very centre of English musical thinking and into the hearts of its people. When Sammons first played the Elgar Violin Concerto in 1914, it was the beginning of a friendship with the composer which lasted until Elgar's death on the 23rd of February 1934, when Sammons was 48 years old. Sammons performed this concerto more than all the concertos in his repertoire, as mentioned, over 100 performances throughout his career. And in 1919 he led premieres of Elgar's Piano Quintet and String Quintet. In May 1915, a chance encounter in London with Frederick Delius led directly to the composition of a violin concerto in which Sammons probably assisted considerably, even to the point of writing some link passages. According to violinist Manuk Perikian, the double stopping in the allegretto towards the end was Sammons' suggested addition to Delius's original. On the 13th of July 1916, Sammons gave the first UK performance of the Violin Sonata of Claude Debussy, only 6 weeks after its Paris premiere. And he played a part in the rehabilitation of Fritz Kreisler by presenting, along with Dame Nellie Melba, a laurel wreath at the Austrian violinist's first appearance in England after the First World War in 1920. Kreisler had, of course, been in the Austro-Hungarian army during World War I. In addition to the Elgar and Delius concertos, Sammons also championed a number of other works by British composers. The Violin Concerto by George Dyson was given its first performance by Sammons in 1942, bringing a concerto by the now little-known composer George Dyson to the public stage. The last concerto appearance by Sammons in 1946 was playing the Mueran Violin Concerto. Sammons' repertoire also included the violin sonatas by John Ireland, and among other English composers whose works were first performed by Sammons are Bantock, Bridge, Goossens and Vaughan Williams. He was also a composer himself and composed many short pieces for violin and piano which he included in his recital programmes and recorded. A Cradle Song of 1915 is dedicated to his second daughter, and the Lullaby of 1923 to his third, Colleen. His fantasy quartet Opus 8 1914 won the Cobbett competition and was published by Hawks and Son the following year. The Romanian Air and Gypsy Dance Opus 23 was published by Hawks in 1929. He also made editions of others' works and published books of studies and exercises. Among his pedagogical works are The Secret of Technique in Violin Playing Opus 20 and The Virtuosic Studies Opus 21, composed in 1921, consisting of 38 studies in 2 books. The Secret of Fine Technique, Virtuoso Studies in 2 volumes, and Studies to Strengthen and Improve Technique are important contributions to violin teaching. He married his second wife, Olive Hobday, the daughter of musicians Ethel Hobday and Alfred Charles Hobday, on the 5th of December 1921. Shortly after, they moved to Bognor Regis, in the same road as William Murdoch, the pianist, who was his friend, where he lived for the rest of his life. And some points to mention that took place during World War II. During the Second World War, Sammons continued his busy concert schedule around the UK, travelling by train, as well as appearing at the National Gallery concerts. William Murdoch and Sammons were recruited into the army and played together in the Grenadier Guards band. Sammons actually played clarinet in the band, and the orchestra acquired their best leader ever. Sammons and Murdoch played often during the Second World War, including a distinguished series of the complete Beethoven sonatas at the Wigmore Hall. Hamilton Harty and Malcolm Sargent also performed with Sammons on occasion and during the Second World War. And Sammons often joined with Myra Hess in the latter's National Gallery lunchtime concerts. And what of Albert Sammons as a teacher? From 1946, Sammons spent less time playing and more teaching. As a teacher, he had worked at the Midland Institute in Birmingham from the 1920s, and from 1939 he taught privately and at the Royal College of Music. His pupils included Alan Loveday, Hugh Bean and Samuel Kutcher. And some other interests to mention, he had a deep passion for golf, and it is said that in later life this kept him in good trim. What did Hugh Bean have to say about Albert Sammons' teaching? Hugh Bean, who was a professor at the Royal College of Music, remembers Sammons' frequent advice to be a bit more stretchy, more like a piece of elastic. According to Bean, Sammons' methods were simple and direct. With so little formal tuition himself, he had to work out most of his own solutions to technical problems. He left the musical ones to one's own instinct, common sense and good taste. He eschewed impressionistic word pictures when teaching, preferring simple exhortations which everyone understood. The practical side of Sammons is again revealed in his statement. If you have 1% inspiration, then that is a bonus. Knowing only too well the pitfalls, Sammons was ever anxious to build into a pupil the armour that is so essential for success. He was a great communicator, and in his presence you felt as if you were the most important person of the world. That piece of elastic simile has stayed with me to this day, the words of Hugh Bean there. As mentioned, Sammons was a persuasive advocate of Delius's works, and his 1944 recording of the Violin Sonata No. 3 with Kathleen Long shows that he maintained his malleable musicianship into the 1940s. On record, Sammons is not only a testament to the changing performing practices of the first half of the 20th century, but also quite clearly an artist of international rank. The onset of Parkinson's disease forced his retirement from public performance in June 1948. He attended a testimonial concert at the Royal Albert Hall on the 7th of December in a wheelchair and heard a tribute from Arthur Bliss, with others in the programme from Joseph Szigeti, Fritz Kreisler and Sir Adrian Boult. Albert Sammons continued despite obstacles. He knew adversity as a youth when he left home with his brother in 1902, and again in 1946 when Parkinson's disease was diagnosed. Despite this devastating illness, he could still joke and say that he had the best vibrato in the business. Sammons bore the illness that eventually killed him with a great dignity. A 1954 benefit concert given on his behalf at the Royal Albert Hall, attended by Sammons despite his failing condition, celebrated the life's work of a unique and undeniably great artist. He died in Middleton-on-Sea in 1957, aged 71. Adrian Bolt said of him after his death that he was distinguished by his selfless interest in music making of all kinds, whether in Queen's Hall or in some humble mission hall or in far-off Wales or Scotland. He was a great musician in every sense of the word. Now let's talk a little about Albert Sammons' violins. His violins included a Goffrelet, and he bought another 1696 Goffrelet in 1927, a Felice Guadagnini and a Nicholas Galliano. At the Cobbett competition in February 1923, he played in a blind comparison of a 1731 Stradivarius and a modern instrument by Alfred Vincent. Because of his involvement with the Cobbett violin making competitions and a desire to promote British makers, Sammons also used this Alfred Vincent violin that won first prize in 1923. When Sammons sold his 1696 Goffrelet in 1951, he gave the new owner a list of all the works that he had played on it. The Tartini's Devil Trill Sonata was recorded on a William Robinson violin, which was described by Sammons to one of his pupils as only a week old with the varnish hardly dry. It is among the finest of his early recordings. Hugh Bean remarked that Sammons got through one violin a week. This statement is obviously an exaggeration, but does express Sammons' interest in a variety of instruments. Sammons' very first violin by the French maker François Pillemont around 1800 was eventually given to his brother Thomas, who became a member of the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Sammons' first important violin was a Giuseppe Rocca. Alfredo Campoli also liked Rocca violins. Thomas Beecham once presented Sammons with a fine Carlo Ferdinando Landolfi violin for his services to the Beecham Orchestra. On tour, Sammons would often use a violin by Vincenzo Panormo and said of this instrument that it looked like a Strad. In 1914 he used a J.B. Guadagnini for chamber music, but it was a Joseph Guarneri del Gesù, lent by Baron d'Allonger, which launched Sammons on his career as soloist. A Stradivari on loan from the WWII Cobbett collection saw Sammons through several years until 1927, when Sammons purchased the violin by Matteo Goffrelet, the 1696 instrument. This Goffrelet instrument served for all important engagements until Sammons' retirement in 1948, and the violin sold by W.E. Hills and Sons in 1918 to Arthur Angle of Cardiff was sold by Angle to Sammons in 1927 and served him well until his retirement. The Elgar Concerto, recorded in 1929, shows just how well it served him. Sammons gave encouragement to many other English makers, including Arthur Richardson in Devon, Albert Code in Cornwall and Dr. Young in Essex, to name but a few. If an instrument passed scrutiny and the price was right, then he would buy it, knowing full well it would serve a useful purpose. As it was never an ambition of his to form a collection, instruments came and went frequently. It is on record that at least 4 Stradivari instruments passed through his hands. He advised his pupils to buy modern Italians, such as those by Giuseppe Rocca. It can be said, though, that Sammons never particularly hankered after a Stradivari or a Del Gesù. So what can we say in conclusion, and what can we say of Albert Sammons' achievements? Albert Sammons possessed an inherent natural talent, being essentially self-taught. Ysaÿe himself was extremely fond of Sammons and once presented the English violinist with a taut bow. Thomas Beecham wrote that Sammons is the best all-round concert master I have met anywhere. In 1911, Sammons was made musician in ordinary to King George V, and he performed the Elgar Violin Concerto under the composer in 1914, and from then on his career as an important soloist was established, and so we can rightly say that he was a champion of English music. The English have not been blessed with that many great composers, but certainly Elgar was one of the very best. Elgar once said that nobody plays my concerto like Albert. He gets to the heart of it. Obviously, many other players had played it including Kreisler, who it was dedicated to, and the famous performance by the young Menuhin, but it seems that Elgar was especially fond of Albert Sammons' performance. Elgar himself acknowledged Sammons' ability to deliver the work with more insight than any other violinist of his day. And Elgar was extremely grateful for Sammons' interest in the concerto, and in 1921, prior to a performance of it in the Queen's Hall, he presented Sammons with a bow made by James Tubbs in 1878, which he had received for his association with the Worcester Orchestral Society many years before. Sammons' close association with Elgar's violin concerto, therefore, further cements his place in the nation's musical history. Sammons effortlessly dominated other English violinists is pretty much an undisputed fact. At heart, Sammons was a romantic, as his recordings of the Bruch and Elgar, for example, demonstrate. Of the many salon pieces he recorded, Elgar's Salut d'Amour and the Kreisler arrangement of Dvorak's Humoresque are standout examples. These simple but delightful melodies are enhanced by a tone that is both sensuous and beguiling.